Hello, welcome to the Be Make Do Soul Makers podcast, where we explore art making and creativity from a place of deeper calling and encourage you to become who you were created to be, make what you were created to make, and do what you were created to do. We are nearing the end of our series on the artist archetypes, and it has been amazing.
It sure has. I mean, seriously, from all the conversations, all the new people we've got to meet, the quiz results, all the episodes, it's been, well, I'll just say right now, Lisa, it's been my favorite series thus far.
Has it?
Absolutely.
Well, I think it has been mine too, in a way, just because it's been so interactive. We've gotten so many emails and messages just saying how helpful the tool's been and mainly how it has helped people get clarity on what they really want and why maybe they haven't fit into a category that they thought they should fit into before. So it's been really, really cool to just be able to see how this is actually practical for people and helping people to get unstuck and free, which is exactly what we're after, right? So It's been really great. And here's what I've been thinking. I think it would be great for us to have a conversation with our listeners and hear your feedback and stories and find out your questions and just have a chance to connect.
Yes. So guess what we're going to do?
What are we going to do?
We're going to hold a live online conversation Thursday, April 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we want you to join us. So send us a message to get the link or sign up for our email list at soulmakers.org and get all the info.
But we're not done yet. Today, we are continuing our conversation about motivation, success, and fulfillment by exploring the artist archetypes: the maker, the mystic, the imaginative visionary, the storyteller, the soul healer, and the prophetic critic. And you can take our quiz. It's not too late to find out your archetype at soulmakers.org/quiz. And throughout the series, we've been fortunate to talk with creatives about how their unique motivations help them overcome challenges and create a fulfilling life in the arts. So in this episode, we're going to be speaking with Corey Frey, a multi-disciplinary artist, poet, and art educator living in Maryland. In addition to his personal creative practice, Corey is the exhibitions manager at the Delaplaine Arts Center in Frederick, Maryland, and is one of the leaders in the Breath and the Clay Creative Arts Conference, which, by the way, Be Make Do will be attending next week. So hopefully we'll get to see you there. Any of the listeners who are going to be at that conference, please stop by our table and say hello. And of course, Corey is also part of the Makers and Mystic Creative Collective. He and his wife, Christy, founded the Well Collaborative, a community in Maryland that values creativity, curiosity, and conversations about art, humanity, faith, and culture.
All right, let's do it.
Well, hey, welcome, Corey. Thanks for being on the Be Make Do podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
So, well, let's just kick it right on off. Let's get started by talking a little bit about you, Corey. I became aware of you and the Well in Maryland many years ago. Actually, a writer friend of mine told me about you all, and it was kind of that weird thing of like it's sort of close enough that we could probably connect, but not quite close enough. And we have an artist community, and they have an artist community. Is this competition, or is this all those things that you think about? And now I'm like all about collaboration and how do we all work together and that kind of stuff. But getting your emails and seeing what you guys do is really, really intriguing. So you are a visual artist. You're a writer, a poet, a curator, a convener, all things. What tell us about you, Corey?
Oh goodness. Yeah. I feel like, when this question comes up, it's like, what do I even talk about? I feel like my hands are in a bunch of different things. And so, I'm a husband and a father is where I like to start talking about things because because I live like a real life outside of, all the other things that I'm involved in finding the right kinds of negotiations between all these different spheres seems really right.
Yeah.
And so I like to kind of start with that. We've got 2 kids. I've got a son named Arthur who's 3. My daughter, Finley, just turned 10.
Mm.
And we live in Frederick, Maryland. I'm a visual artist. I keep a painting discipline. But honestly, I exhibit work in various places. So I've had a couple shows in the last couple of years. I have one coming up. And so that feels like a essential part of what I'm stewarding right now. And writing has become like really important to me over the last couple of years. The poetry in particular has been this thing that reading has always been really important. Books are really important to me. But poetry has become this developed relationship that fits like really wonderfully into the busyness of my life right now, in that, the format's shorter, but also poems go to another level if you take the time to memorize them. And if you do that, then you can carry it with you throughout the day. And it doesn't matter whether or not you have, 2 hours to sit down with a book. And so,
Right.
A discipline with poetry, more like a relationship with poetry, has been really important for me. And I've really been exploring what that means for me as a writer as well. So I've been writing a lot. Well, here comes the rest of the list. So my full-time gig is I work as the exhibitions manager of an art center here in Frederick, where we live. It's been around for a long time. I actually took a class there when I was a young boy.
Oh, wow.
And we've got 5 on-site gallery spaces that I'm in charge of. We work with local and regional artists, some national, and the very, very occasional international exhibition, a lot of group shows and things. So I'm in charge of that. And then what you already mentioned, the Well Collaborative is something that I lived in Florida for about 12 years. My wife and I got married and had our daughter while we were in Florida, and we ended up kind of uprooting from there for a lot of reasons. But one of the biggest reasons was to start what we've come to call a creative community. And it's the elevator pitch doesn't work very well with it, because it is as messy as a community can kind of be,
right,
as any organic thing. And so we try to get together and encourage one another to make things. And we facilitate that in different ways. And we hold events with other places as the Well, and, some things like that. And then probably the last thing worth mentioning, is that I am one of the leaders of the Breath in the Clay, which is a conference that's coming up in March in North Carolina. And I help out with the art exhibition that's a part of that, and, do various jobs with that. So goodness, that's a long laundry list of things. But
it's a very full life, right? It's a very full list.
Yeah.
And I totally relate to what you're saying with the Well and the shape of that community, because the elevator pitch. I remember at one point I kind of got a little anxiety going into social situations where somebody might ask me, well, what do you do? Because I think, oh gosh, how do I explain it? Who are you and what would your frame of reference be around this? And but it is interesting too. Like, I remember having a conversation with somebody over the years who would constantly would say, how are things going? And I would tell them about all the people that we connected with and all the artists that, the conversations we were having and what was going on. And he would kind of say, oh yeah, that sounds great. I knew you'd do the art thing going, but how's the church going? Where's the church part of it? But, and it's just so interesting. I think when you get a group of artists together who are Christians or who are spiritually minded. I mean, most artists are spiritually minded. Like, it just flows into so many different spheres, and it just does look different. And it's having the freedom and having people who can encourage you to be organic in that way is really, really important and life-giving.
Yeah. And, it doesn't help when when your community engagements are interdisciplinary, that divaricates and branches off in all kinds of different ways. So the other thing about it is that, and I'm sure we could dive into this more, but, real communities are organic things. And, Wendell Berry, if you know the poet Wendell Berry, he's helped me really think about how anything that has organic life is constantly in cycles of growth and decay. And so we're all kind of growing and decaying in some areas of our lives. And that's also true for organizations if you're committed to it being organic and having that kind of generative life. And so, like, just to be totally candid with you, we've been in sort of a fluctuation of more of the necessity of decay with the well recently. We haven't been meeting as often as we have before, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But it's been very helpful for me to think within that framework, because then it doesn't belittle what we've done and what we're continuing to do. And it's not as discouraging, because, there's another term, agricultural term, furrowing the soil, where farmers they'll till the ground, without planting. So they don't plant in order to reap, but there's like this working of the soil in order for the stirring of nutrients.
Yeah.
And so there's not an explicit expectation of your current work for an outcome of growth. You have to be thinking long haul with it. Wow. And that's been very helpful for me to think of when it comes to the well. And when it comes to these things like the elevator pitch, I think it's really important to be succinct and try to figure those out. But I also think that we can succumb to the pressure of kind of belittling the robustness and the the multi-dimensional factors of what we do if we cram them into language that doesn't suit them or doesn't do them justice, really doesn't honor them in some ways. And so that's a real challenge. I mean, I think this whole thing flows very well even into the topic of conversation. But I don't know. What do you think about that? Does that seem right to you?
Oh my gosh, it seems so. First of all, Convergence is in a similar space where we've gotten. So I love that imagery of intentional kind of pruning and death in order for new life to happen, and that furrowing.
Yeah.
And I also think it's such helpful language as artists, and maybe specifically Christians in the arts, to understand. I think that there's a freedom that comes with understanding that what we create has eternal value. Meaning, if it's good and true and beautiful, if it's something that's, for the kingdom, that it lasts perpetually. And it's so, even beyond the reality that, something you write now, somebody 100 years from now might pick up and it changes their life. But there is this pressure always, I think, for a desire to have an impact, whether it's to affect somebody or to get monetary success or recognition. It's so easy. And I've certainly experienced that with Convergence and community building. If you don't have an X number of butts and seats, how can you call yourself successful when it's like, well, the whole purpose of this is to make a really big mess and fail a lot and make a lot of mistakes so that other people don't have to, they can learn from ours and we grow. So I think that's part of why it's so awesome to be in community and conversation with other artists like this, because we can encourage each other that, no, that's actually what we do. It's not a problem.
Right. And, that's the point of having something like the mentioning of the great cloud of witnesses, that we have people like Jeremiah who spent the entirety of their life with a fire in his bones, and all of his work, all of that fire being expended, does not result in success in like modern day terms, it actually results in the opposite.
Yeah.
And Jesus was no different. Like Jesus was kind of like, well, you're really mad because I said you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, and you're going to leave me, but I'm actually not going to explain myself and follow you. I'm going to allow the misunderstanding to kind of perpetuate itself, and my job isn't necessarily to be clearly understood. I think I think a little bit that there's a great sort of a renewal of a recognition of some dormant things in humanity. And I think it's really important that there are all these movements towards kind of the connections between art and faith, because artists have the possibility to teach us again about how immediate success isn't the goal, and how failure and play is really important, and that doesn't look saleable sometimes. And so I think that there's sort of this reflexive move from what we've been taught in a lot of ways is, all right, well, success means that you clearly define what Jesus wants for your life, and then I want to be careful here because I'm not trying to besmirch any of the traditional things that we do, but the difficulty is that we've been told that the gospel is good news in modern terms of what we mean by news, and not in the way that it was meant in ancient ways. And so we think that we think that clear communication is a necessity, and we think that like very specific responses are success in our circles, and that's not necessarily the case. And so I think the artist has a lot to teach us about what that can look like and how to make things. My understanding is that art tends to reintroduce complexity into things that have been overly simplified.
That's a good definition.
And I think that there's some work to be done in that direction. And it makes me really excited for things like what you're doing and all the things that are springing up in different places.
I think it is an exciting time. No, that's okay. No, I think it is a really exciting time. And I think there seems to be a more and more openness to, I think there's an explosion in emphasis on studies of the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible, which then leads to the importance of storytelling and understanding story and understanding poetry and these kinds of things, that then it's like, okay, well, great, let us in there. We can help to explore and kind of explode things from the inside so that we can learn them on a deeper level than just whatever that clear answer is, like you're saying. Yeah. Well, okay. So Corey, you've talked about, there's a lot of different pieces to your life and to your creative life. I just a couple of minutes reading your work or looking at your artwork, you can tell that you take it very seriously. You're very good at it, very thoughtful about it. You're very thoughtful about how you've kind of orchestrated your life and the different pieces of it. Is that just the way that you think? Is that the way you've always been? Where did you start out with this? Did you think you were going to go be an artist? Did you think you were going to go be a painter, a banker? What was what was the path for you?
Yeah, I went to school first to a small ministry school in order to be a pastor. And it was a 2-year school that I went to, and it taught me a lot of things, but when I left, what I realized was I went through a season that I really struggled, and I graduated from there. I moved back in with my parents. I was already an older student to begin with, and really struggled with where I was at, really kind of a dark place, and not necessarily dark in a bad way. I'm actually very grateful for the difficulty of it. But when I was making these commitments to wake up early in the morning, and I remember one morning feeling the sense of I don't like to say that I heard a whisper, but I felt a whisper of, Corey, don't you remember how as a kid you loved drawing? And I would spend hours drawing as a child. And it's not that I directly like put that aside for the sake of other things, but very indirectly that kind of worked itself out of my life for the sake of, for a lot of other reasons.
Yeah.
And, but that question, feeling the whisper of that was enough for me to pick up a pencil and to start drawing a little bit. And then, and that was enough for me to start thinking about creativity in a more serious way and to pick up a paintbrush and start painting. And I remember sitting on my parents' back porch and I would paint it with acrylic paint. And then I actually took an oil painting class at the place that I work now. And in a very roundabout way, I ended up going back to school, for art. I started off at a state college, and it was a great school. I moved back to Florida. Goodness, it's always hard to talk about. It's so circuitous, but I moved back to Florida. I went to a state school that had a great art program and just chipped away at classes here and there. And then I ended up, finishing there and decided, I'm going to go to undergrad for studio art. And I kind of dove into there, and I had the benefit of being an older student and having worked a bunch of jobs that I didn't like. So I knew, I knew that I was throwing myself into this headlong, and I knew too that, I had already given myself toward my passions, meaning, like, I was passionate about going to ministry school. There was nothing there. It wasn't a mistake that I went there. I didn't miss the mark or something. I was passionate about it, and the word passion means something you're willing to suffer for. And so I don't know where it comes from, but I have that sense in me that I want to be passionate about things. And I really want to, I don't know. I want to live life to its fullest. I want to make meaning. I want meaning to be a part of my life. And so, anyway, I went back to school, threw myself into that, and started exhibiting some places and making connections with other artists and working in some gallery settings and stuff like that. So that was kind of the onset of my current progression.
Yeah. Well, so what would you say? Let's talk about motivation for a minute and passion. Like, what is it that have you spent much time thinking about that? Like, why you're drawn to the arts, why you keep doing what you do, and maybe also I'm thinking about like what keeps that passion alive for you. How do you maintain passion over time?
I'd probably say that I'm most passionate about curiosity. I think maybe that's right. And the other thing that comes to mind, Lisa, is that, whenever artists have talked about what they do creatively, they've kind of always utilized terms that center around relationship. And so they've used words like the muse or inspiration. Right. And inspiration's an interesting one because the word spirit's in it. And if you take seriously things like, the Greek for spirit is pneuma, which means breath or wind. And so built into this idea of breath is reciprocity. It is the give and take of breath. And I mean, the origin story that we have as Christians is that we're breathed into and we breathe out again. And the thing about relationship, and I think I'm answering your question here. The thing about relationship is that it's always reciprocal. There's always a give and a take on both sides. Otherwise, it's transactional and not a real relationship. It has to be reciprocal in order to be an intimate relationship. And And that has me very interested in, and I think curiosity ties into this. That has me very interested in, I wouldn't know what that means about what I'm passionate about, other than I'm very passionate about having a relationship with God. That's always been really important to me. And what I've come to realize is that, like, what I think I've come to realize is that if reciprocity is a necessity for relationship, then inspiration is important because we receive it, but if it's reciprocal, then we also have to give it. And this idea that God is actually inspired by us, or that we can fill God with wonder, feels really important in that reciprocal nature of relationship. And I'm very passionate about that. I'm very, and curiosity plays a part in that. The thing about relationship too is that, and I'm noticing this with my kids, is that the parameters of being an individual aren't very clearly defined. Like we need one another to grow. There's a philosopher, physicist named Karen Brad calls it intra-action rather than just interaction. That and we're recognizing this as we grow in our understanding of consciousness, that when you pay attention to something, the world changes. And so there's this sense that, like, who we are isn't very clearly defined, but it bounces off of, and when you notice things in other people and the way that other people act actually helps define who you are. So again, this reciprocity thing, and the reason why I bring that up is because I feel like all of my creative work is about exploration, is all about not necessarily the end goal of making a product, but of investigation, that fuel for curiosity. I don't know. Does that answer the question a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that curiosity word, you use that quite a few times. I think that's a big part. And I think that makes sense. A lot of creatives, a lot of artists are, I think that ability to be curious is so important to find the new discovery, and also to keep going when it gets tough, when circumstances aren't right or interpersonal circumstances aren't right. I mean, how do you keep that curiosity alive, or is that even a problem for you? Like, have you ever struggled with, keeping that curiosity going, and what do you do to, like, feed that for yourself?
What tends to throw to try to put out the fire of that for me, what tends to do that most quickly is allowing the wrong kinds of value systems to guide me. And so, like, we're all sort of swimming in the culture of the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution, its value system was all based on numbers.
Right.
And the Enlightenment value systems the Enlightenment's value system is based off of understanding. It's based off of, like, how much can I apprehend? And I've felt that pressure and continue to feel it all the time. But what I've really tried to do is to kind of develop an ecosystem that honors ignorance might not be the right word, but it kind of is. It's that Paul says that we see through a glass darkly. And in saying that, he's simultaneously saying that we know things. We know that we see through a glass darkly, but he's also saying that we don't know things. And so an apprehension of knowledge often will kind of put out the fire of curiosity for me, if that's a goal. And then, industrial sort of value system constraints will also damper that fire some. And so, developing a framework where I kind of fall back into intuition and even into emotion, and allowing those an intuitive intelligence and an emotional intelligence to kind of rule in certain times of day. So like I construct very specific, I try to keep a regimented routine where I carve out times of my day.
Oh, interesting.
That this time of day will be set aside to honor intuitive intelligence and emotional intelligence rather than these other systems of value. And in developing that, I can see how it benefits the rest of my life. It also causes some problems, like if I can't exactly go into my job, my day-to-day job that's mostly admin and be like, well, I'm just going to be led by my emotional intelligence. I'll be kicked out of there pretty quick. So anyway, I think we need to figure out ways that we can honor those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I do feel like my regimen isn't very strict, other than it's like during this time will be dedicated to that. And it's kind of like up in the air of what happens in that time. You know what I mean?
I love that. I really am a big fan of kind of creating frameworks of time, of environment, of people to do that part intentionally so that you're not constantly making the decision as you go along about what kind of person you want to be, like just constantly being shaped almost by force. But I get to choose what that structure is, but then it's going to help shape me into who I really need and want to be.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, would you share a little bit about what that structure looks like for you? How you've worked that out for yourself?
Set apart space is important. A dedication to tools is actually really important. I think it's really important to have things. If you're a maker, like if you're making things with your hands, I think it's really important to have tools that feel good in your hands. Like as practical a thing that is. So a friend of mine gave me a pen a couple of months ago, actually. He's an incredible pen maker. John Tello's his name. He makes fountain pens. He sent me this fountain pen, and I've been taking time to write with it. And I'm trying more and more to abandon writing on my laptop or a digital space, but write with the hand. And so I'm setting aside this intentional time. I was just telling somebody about this the other day. The fountain pen is problematic in so many ways because
it's messy.
It's messy. I've had an issue this past week where I've been writing with it for a long time, and the ink in the nib is starting to dry. And so it's not writing as well as it should. So it takes more care.
Right.
And I actually have been thinking about how important that is in that I'm not dedicating myself to an outcome and to an efficiency that results in an outcome. I'm dedicating myself to a tool and to like a medium and to language and to paper and a pen or to a brush and oil paint. I'm dedicating myself to those things, and my interest and curiosity is kind of tied up in those.
Yeah.
And that means that it's not always efficient. It actually means that it causes more problems than it is efficient sometimes. And so having a space and time carved out for that kind of like actual work has felt really important. So, I carve out time, I carve out space, and then usually I'll sit down. I'll sit down and I'll try to figure out some kind of way, and it's always a little bit different of how to figure out what's going on in the depths of me. And it's been a commitment to deep places within myself. Figure out what's going on there and then respond to that. Like, does that mean that I paint right now, or does that mean that I write? Does that mean that I was sculpting a little bit with clay the other morning, which I hadn't done in a while, but it felt right. So it's stuff like that,
Yeah. Yeah. I love that kind of creating those rhythms And then you have to trust them. Because I just recently took part one of a sabbatical. I took a little bit of time off in January, and I had set it aside for rest. But as I kind of got started with that, I realized, what I mean by rest is not that I need to take a lot of naps, or I just need to watch TV, or it's not that kind of rest. It's something a lot deeper than that. And then it kind of came to realizing that I needed to create structures that allow me to address the deeper things in my life, kind of like that pen, I need to address that pen part of me that needs, the dried stuff needs to be cleaned out, and then to make a regular structure so that I am doing that on a regular basis. And it can feel so unproductive to have that time. And even I find even when it feels good, and I know there are a lot of people who do this with their studio, they're like, I want to go to the studio, but then I kind of feel guilty because I should be doing all these other things. And it's almost like if it feels good and it feels right, then somehow it feels wrong because it's not productive. Again, that industrialist mindset. It's so interesting. But yeah, to keep that as a discipline and realizing how much those external and just ritual actions actually do transform what you create, who you are. They shape you.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you mentioned the word rhythm. Also, I'm a drummer. I play drums a bit here and there. And the thing that strikes me about rhythm, I always, people have always said, like, you don't need balance, you need rhythm. And I think that's right, but also we need a real understanding of what rhythm is. And rhythm is as nuanced and as complex as what I was talking about with organic life, rhythm means that there are syncopated rhythms that don't match up, measure by measure. They don't necessarily match up.
Right. And
the other thing is that, silence is a real important part of rhythm as well. And so I was very lucky to have a fantastic painting instructor named John Markowitz in my undergrad. And we talked a lot about how, like, a great deal of painting is done without a brush in your hand. Like, a great deal of painting is spending time looking at things, paying very close attention. We think that we know how to see,
right.
But being a painter or drawing actually really teaches you, one, how to see, and also how much you don't really know how to see.
Yeah.
And we need to be reminded of that sort of thing. But the whole rhythm, back to the rhythm thing, is like, I think people get very discouraged. And again, this is back to the industrial thing. It's like, well, was this time productive? Did I make anything?
Yeah.
And we've got to have some grace with ourselves as far as making things goes, in that sometimes, like, you really need to spend some time looking. I had an exhibition at a college last January, and I made, for 2 years, I was making the work for it. And part of my morning routine, I found that I was waking up really early in the morning in order to make the work, because I had to go to work that day, and I have kids and things. And so I was waking up really early. And sometimes I'd fall asleep in my studio, like, looking at the paintings that I was working on. And I actually really came to value those times. And they actually informed a lot of the work, in that they freed up the possibility of me recognizing the importance of what it means to dream and to be kind of in that liminal space between dreaming and awake. Sometimes I'd go away really frustrated with myself. Like, I should have been like productive.
Right.
But I really was productive. I was really grabbing onto something that I didn't know that I needed to grab onto. And so, the whole thing about rhythms, I think, is worth exploring and thinking about more, and letting it be as complicated as it needs to be, and giving ourselves grace in the midst of doing that kind of stuff, of making things.
I just think I love the way you're thinking about these things and the freedom that's in there. And then it makes me think about how important those kinds of lessons or understandings of life and what it takes to really appreciate what life is really all about. And it is so, the word countercultural is overused, but it is extremely countercultural to live. And I don't just mean as a creator or as a creative person, but as an artist. I think there is a difference there, as a person who dedicates significant time and energy and focus to developing craft, and then to be able to do the deeper things that are necessary to, like you said, to learn how to really see, and then to give that in an expressive format in some way to other people, to hopefully invite them also into an experience that's deeper than just the other everyday. And I feel like that's I feel so privileged to be around those kinds of people and to sometimes be one of those people. It does seem like a calling to me. And I feel like there's something about it, maybe especially right in our postmodern age, coming out of this industrial and Enlightenment way of thinking, that's so necessary and important. And I just really, I'm beginning to really believe that God is inviting artists to be a little bit bolder, and that all these things that seem unproductive and seem, whatever labels people might give it or give us, to that this is what's really, really needed right now. Like learning how to just be silent for a long period of time can heal so much.
Right. And, we can tend to sort of superimpose the industrial value system on top of Christianity, and talk about the necessary production of the kingdom but if we take, again, back to the cloud of witnesses thing, if you think about the life of Jesus, and like most of his life 30 years of his life was spent not necessarily doing the work of the ministry. 3 years, 3. And not just that, but he wasn't necessarily Jesus wasn't efficient either, is the thing, is that we've got to come to grips with the productivity that we're used to in our modern world isn't necessarily the productivity of the kingdom.
Right.
And that makes it far more complicated. It makes it way more messy, but it makes us rely on trust, and trust always involves risk.
Yeah.
And so again, I think the artists do have the possibility of teaching us some things about what the kingdom of God is like.
Your definition of the word passion keeps going through my mind of something that you're willing to die for. And I certainly have been on ups and downs journey with passion itself, because when I was younger, everything was passion. I was just driven, and I had such passion, such vision. And then as I got older, kind of that white knuckling through it and pushing, living on passion started to kind of give way. And just running a community, there's so many things that happen, and you kind of, and hitting burnout a little bit. I don't know, I have this ongoing questioning relationship with passion of I want it back. I want those same levels back, but I feel like there's this, at this point in my life, there's maybe an invitation to developing this curiosity, like a genuine curiosity, and surrendering kind of some of those things that I think I want, or the results, or the end thing that I'm going to affect, that's going to make the difference, to find the love and the passion just for the thing, just for the discovery. And that's something I'm having to kind of teach myself to do.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, I was talking at a songwriter's retreat. I don't know what I was doing there because I'm not a songwriter, but I was talking at a songwriter's retreat a couple weeks ago. And one of the questions that came up was, and I promise this will get to what you were saying, but it was, do you police your creative intake?
Oh.
Like what you're intaking? And it made me think about my kids because, and this circles back to what you were saying, that before I had kids, I would try to set up everything in my life toward making the most meaning as possible in my day. It was like, I'm going to regiment things down to like suck the meaning out of life. But then once I had kids, how I was telling it to them was that my car used to be kind of a sanctuary for listening to music, and I would listen to whatever I wanted to. But now that I have kids, I'm listening to like Disney soundtracks and stuff.
Right.
And there's only so much of an enforcement of meaning that I can do in my life. But now I feel like the tables have been turned a little bit to where I'm not trying to enforce meaning or even enforce passion in my life as much as I am trying to recognize meaning in the mundanity of the world. Right. And that's something that I feel like I am trying to learn day to day. Because you'll like exhaust yourself. You'll totally burn yourself out on just trying to get meaning out of, like, again, enforce meaning into everything. Right. But if you're just learning how to pay enough attention to receive meaning, that's a different story. I think there's, I hope there's some levels of maturity there that I'm learning. We'll see. Maybe it's just with me, being going down the other side of the hill of 40 or something like that. But,
no, I love that as a discipline. I think that's a wonderful discipline. Yeah.
No, I think what you're saying about passion is right on. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you. We're talking about art making and creativity and life and spirituality, and I wonder, do you even think about what you do? Do you think about these things in terms of career at all? A career? Do you ever think about your career, or are you just kind of thinking about, okay, how do I craft this life around me?
Well, I know that I've made a decision to work for a living, something that I love my job. Like it dovetails beautifully with the artistic and creative life, but it also is, 80 to 90% administrative, and that's not my strong suit. I struggle there. I'm learning and growing in those areas, but I really struggle there. So, and I've always done jobs that I didn't necessarily like. And again, I really like my job now, but I've made the decision to not think in terms of a career for like visual art or for writing necessarily. I've made that decision, and that is not the decision that other people necessarily need to make.
But that was a conscious decision for you, right? To say, okay, the way I make money is not going to be the place where I'm putting the majority of my creative output.
I just don't place that expectation. I don't place the $ expectation on top of it. That is a decision that I've made. And it's not just the $, but it's also coming to grips with being misunderstood, because that's another value system. So if the $ or the money sign is the value system of the industrial age, then understanding and comprehension is the value system of sort of the Enlightenment way of thinking and the scientific revolution, that we want to undergird like knowledge.
Yeah.
And the way that I work, I'm very process driven when it comes to writing and when it comes to visual art. I'm so interested in the process and in the materials that I don't know what I'm going to end up with. And that means that in order to do that, I can't be thinking of like, this is going to sustain my family, because I'm dedicated to the investigation of that. And so, yeah, it's a conscious decision that I've made. And honestly, it's probably a harder, this is for me personally, it's a harder decision for me to decide, like, I'm not working towards being understood than it is for me to say, like, I'm working, I'm not working in order to earn money. Right. I'm happy to, it comes with its struggles, but I'm happy to work in order so I can create whatever I want to.
Yeah.
But the misunderstanding part is probably harder for me.
I love that delineation too, and even putting them on an equal plane, because I don't think you're alone at all in that creating and wanting to be understood. I personally relate to that, but I also hear it quite a bit, and I think it comes across sometimes in this. There's like this added on top of it from a Christian perspective, wanting to make an impact for God.
Yeah, that's
right. That somehow it needs to do something for God. And if you're not seeing that result, that somehow you're not doing it right, or you're not being faithful, or it's just, you're failing.
Right.
But I think what you're kind of illuminating for me, another aspect of why that's problematic, is that that's a value system that's being imposed on what we're doing that doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit at all.
Yeah. And there's a couple of, as far as the specificity, the Christian side of things, like John the Baptist and the prophet Daniel have been really important for me on like the misunderstandings sort of thing. They've been really important for me on the misunderstanding side of things, especially in the Christian world. Goodness, we don't want to just understand things. We want to make mantras and axioms out of everything. And we do it like God bless us. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with mantras and axioms, but they're necessary, but they're always insufficient. And they don't necessarily like actually reach into the complexity of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah.
And so if you're interested in being a human being, and God's actually really interested in us being human beings.
Yeah. And
so I don't think that being fully understood by certain groups of people is the right way to live up to things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not unified as well.
Right.
Similarity and unity are not the same thing. And so.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, especially in the world that we live in, right. Which has probably always been the case. But well, let me ask you one more thing around this. So given all of these things, how do you think about how you share your work? Like, how do you think about an audience? So the word stewardship is really important. And the word continuity is really important to me, because it's not just about viability and whether or not something has had the right kind of gestational period about whether or not it's viable. It's like, I'm going to make the best work that I can, and and in stewarding the work, I'll have a sense of what the social parameters around that work is. Again, my dedication to that craft and like treating these things as wild. They're wild things in the best sense of the word. And they're organic living sort of things that I can honor. I can kind of honor the point of their maturation and like what they need, and not necessarily what I need or want, but like there's negotiations there. Yeah. Yeah. That's such a wonderful way of looking at it and allowing it to have its own relationship with an audience and being curious to see that. And I would imagine too that it gives a certain sense of freedom in the creation of it to not be so focused on what's this going to do, what's this going to do for me or for somebody else or for the world, but just it's a thing that is a part, has been a part of my life. It's the process itself is valuable and important. And then once that's all done, then there's the question of where do you want to go from here? I love that.
It can sound a little more romantic than it actually is. Like in the studio, you better believe that when I have a brush in hand and I'm making marks on a canvas and I'm trying to follow my intuition, that in the back of my head, there is that thing that's saying like, what's the response to this going to be? Like those things exist and they're real and they're actually really important. It's not that I completely push them aside, but it's not necessarily the time for them. I'm actually happy that exists in my life, that there is this sense of critique, because critique is a part of stewardship. Like I'm interested in making good work.
Right.
I just am. And so I think we need to figure out how to maybe compartmentalize isn't the right word, but to figure out what voices need to be in the conversation at the right time.
At the right time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you one last question to kind of like wrap this up. And it's more of a feeling question, I guess. But what does it feel like for you when you have created something or you've been a part of something that just kind of feels like it fits right in the center of everything that motivates you and excites you and has that passion and curiosity? Like describe what that feels like for me.
It's a great question, but it's also very challenging because I'm not one for, some people talk about finding your voice, and like when they say that, they kind of mean, sometimes they mean like you find your voice and then, you utilize that voice or whatever. I think that we're always trying to find our voice. I think that I have no idea who I am.
Right.
And so to say that I found my voice seems ridiculous. And I'm saying that to say like another part of that, like finding the right words in the right moment feels like I've revealed a little bit more of myself to myself.
To yourself.
And to God, actually. There's a verse. I'm totally rabbit trailing here. There's a verse, that said where Jesus says, you'll say that we cast out demons, we healed the sick, we did all these things in your name. And the Father will say, depart from me, I never knew you. Well, God's not saying, depart from me, you never knew me. He's saying, depart from me, I never knew you. And the question I've been asking myself for a while now is, well, who's responsible for revealing me to God? And the answer is me. And I do feel like in those moments where things are right and I walk up the stairs out of my studio to get ready for my work day, if I've been honest and there's been a continuity between my work and my heart, I do feel like I've revealed myself to myself and to God. And that there's, that's such an indescribably beautiful and like robust and multidimensional feeling.
I love that. I'm trying to write a book, and there's a question that gets asked in different circumstances of like, when are you going to celebrate? Like when will you know you've accomplished, when will be the point when this is finished that you'll celebrate? And it always, for me, it's like when I sit down and read the final manuscript, I will feel so good. Like I don't, it'd be great for other people to read it, but to have my thoughts actually clear enough that they're reflected back to me that I can say, yeah that's what I think.
Right. Yeah.
Would be it'll just be so rewarding and a relief to be able to have expressed that, because sometimes it feels so hard to express what's really, really going on inside.
Right.
So I get that. Well, wow, Corey, this has been such a great conversation. I feel like there's a lot of wisdom that you've spoken, and I want to go back and take some notes for myself. But it's just, I really appreciate the way that you approach your work and life. And I feel like there's a lot that you've shared that's really helpful for people as we're kind of thinking through, how do we create a life as an artist, as a Christian, as a person in this time and in this way, and have the freedom and the encouragement from people like you to say, it's okay to do it a different way. In fact, that's probably a really good thing, and you can give yourself permission to take this time and create different kinds of rhythms and patterns. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences and your thoughts with us.
Yeah, goodness, thank you for having me. I love what you're doing. I think it's so, you're creating a space for that kind of a community of encouragement. And so that's really beautiful. And I've really enjoyed listening to some of the conversations you've had. And I really appreciate being here.
Well, thanks, Corey.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put all the information about the well, Breath in the Clay, the gallery that you work at, your work, into the show notes so that people can find you and follow you as well.
Great. Thank you.
Join us next time as we wrap up the Artist Archetype series and pull it all together with a discussion on how to use what you've learned to create your fulfilling path in the arts.
Thanks for listening to Be Make Do, a Soulmakers podcast. All links and resources are located in our show notes. Want to know your artist archetype? Take the quiz at soulmakers.org/quiz.